family when I can bring one of my grandchildren to a firehouse, my Bella, because we have firefighters as icons in our society, and we owe them all of the support we can give. And we had no greater lesson than that within the past month, and I thank the firefighters of San Francisco for what they did for the North Bay in that very sad situation. I'm honored to be here with my colleague from the East Bay, Congresswoman Barbara Lee, and she is a member of the Appropriations Committee, which makes some of the decisions about where we place our resources, and that means a reflection of our values. Who better than Barbara Lee to reflect our values in the budget fight that goes on in Washington, D.C. We have some very special guests with us here today. We're going to hear from Sean Buford, a San Francisco firefighter, Shaya Kara, a USF graduate, and Vanjie Buell, who's going to speak to her about the medical deduction and the possible elimination of it. I won't go more into describing them because I want you to hear directly from them how they would be affected by what is happening in Washington, D.C. What is happening this weekend all over the country is just, we were just comparing notes, Congresswoman Lee and I, all over the country, many representatives of Congress are engaged in occasions such as this to present to their constituents what is at risk for them in this assault on the middle class that the Republicans are putting forth. It is a tax scam. I'll go more into it. But all starting today and going into Monday, there'll be scores of events, presentations by members and candidates as to why this is wrong. This is a very important debate for us. We love to change the bill. But in order to change the bill, the Republican members of Congress have to see how destructive it is to their community. And this is very important in California because this bill, this tax scam that the Republicans are foisting on the Congress is very destructive to California for reasons I will go into. But it's hard to therefore understand why all 14 Republicans voted against California in the bill. Doug LaMalfa in District 1, Tom McClintock, Paul Cook, Jeff Denham, David Valadao, Devin Nunes, Kevin McCarthy, Steve Knight, Ed Royce, Ken Calvert, Mimi Walters, Dana Rohrabacher, Darrell Issa, and Duncan Hunter. The question to them is, how can you vote for a bill that is an assault on the economic security of hundreds, tens of thousands, in some cases over 100,000 of your constituents' families? And I can go into the numbers and I can give them to you if you wish. It's particularly alarming that in Northern California, 3 of the members, Doug LaMalfa, over 100,000 of his constituents are affected, over $10,000 each. Tom McClintock, 139,000 of his constituent families are affected, and over $11,000. And Paul Cook, nearly 60,000 to the tune of nearly $9,000 each, and then the list goes on. But it's important to note as we gather in this firehouse that none of these people, except for one, Ed Royce, none of the Republicans in Congress voted, assigned the letter to the administration for the fire funds that Governor Brown requested of the administration and in the administration's budget, and as we go forward with the next supplemental. It's important to note also, in relationship to fires, that these same members, all 14 of them, voted for a tax bill that says the following. If you have property loss, et cetera, because of the hurricanes, you can deduct your losses from your taxes, but not from fires. Is that stunning? Is that stunning? Is that mean-spirited? What's that all about? And these members all voted for a budget that does that, and some of them are on the Ways and Means Committee that reinforced that message again. But it's really hard to understand or explain, but these members are going to have to explain it to their constituents, and I have that list available to you should you want that. It's important to note that 24 mayors sent a letter to the whole California delegation saying, please, don't do this SALT. It's state and local taxes that no longer would be deducted. Now to add, how should I say, rub salt into the wound, let me put it that way. If you're an individual, you cannot deduct your state and local taxes. If you are a corporation, you can. Imagine that. And this whole tax bill is a gift to corporate America. $1.5 trillion in tax cuts, at the rate of $1.5 trillion tax cut for corporations. At the same time, having provisions in the bill to make it easier for them to ship jobs overseas. You start a business overseas, you get a tax break compared to starting a business here. Give them a tax cut, also give them a tax break to send jobs overseas. And by the way, you can still deduct your state and local taxes. It's interesting, I think, to note that that 1.5 trillion rate of cut for the corporation, exactly the same number that they voted in their budget bill that is the premise for this. That was a week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago, I guess by now. They cut 1.5, do you remember I said 1.5 trillion rate of tax cut for corporations? They cut $1.5 trillion from Medicare and Medicaid. $1 trillion from Medicaid, $500 billion from Medicare, in keeping with their theory that Medicare should wither on the vine and Medicaid should fade away. So this is really, as I say, an assault on the middle class and an insult to the intelligence of the American people. Because they're saying to the American people, oh, this is a tax break for the middle class. Really? You throw us a few crumbs to the middle class, you plunder middle class families, and some of the provisions that you'll hear about now. But the fact is 38 million middle class families will have a tax increase. In California, 2.2 million middle class households will have a tax increase. Because so it's a bill that raises taxes on the middle class, no matter what they say, slashes taxes for the wealthiest and corporations, explodes the deficit. They're supposed to be deficit hawks, explodes the deficit. I think the deficit hawk is probably an endangered species, if not extinct by now. Gives tax incentives to corporations to send jobs overseas, ransacks Medicare and Medicaid, and that's their gift to the middle class. Again, we talked about some of the provisions, but don't take it from me. You're going to hear about it from our guest. And it is my honor to introduce one of them, and that is Sean Buford, San Francisco firefighter, Local 798, and bringing him to the fore to thank him and all of the firefighters for what they do. Remember this, when they eliminate the deduction for state and local taxes, they are harming the ability of state and localities to meet the needs of people and to, again, provide for our public safety that we're so proud of in our San Francisco firefighters. Sean, please join us here. Thank you.
Thank you, dear Pelosi. Good morning. My name is Sean Buford, and I'm a lieutenant with the San Francisco Fire Department and a proud member and treasurer of San Francisco Firefighters, Local 798. First and foremost, I'd like to thank Leader Pelosi and all the elected officials on Capitol Hill who stood up for and continue to stand with the citizens, firefighters, and all agencies within public safety. I want to share a few thoughts on how the proposed bill, the Tax Cut and Job Act of 2017, will have a negative impact on state and local agencies. Numerous exemptions and deductions will be repealed in the name of growth and efficiency. However, the one provision of the bill that caps state and local tax, also known as the SALT deduction, which allow workers to lower the amount of taxes they pay to the federal government will have huge implications on state and local agencies to properly fund their departments with personnel and equipment. I am on my 25th year with the San Francisco Fire Department and a proud member of this station, Station 4. In my 25 years, I have witnessed firsthand the negative impacts of budget cuts after the recession of 2008 and how those budget cuts placed a greater strain on the personnel who continued to work with reduced staffing and equipment that was aged and at times outdated. It was a bipartisan budget led by Leader Pelosi that provided state and local agencies funding in the form of safer grants and stimulus funding to get by during their lean times. Under this new plan, a worker can deduct up to $10,000 in property tax, yet state and income tax will no longer be deductible. However, because 60% of the state revenue comes from taxes, this cap will force local governments to reduce funding, including that for public safety. This bill is not just bad for government agencies. It is also bad for the working middle class worker who relies on these deductions to provide for their families with the extra needed income to get by. This attack on the SALT steals a deduction claimed by more than 6 million California households with an average deduction of $18,000. This threatens to drive down home values, hurt homeowners, endanger vital state and local funding for public services like fire, police, hospitals, and schools. I ask the GOP to stop and listen to the voices of the men and women of the IAFF and to work towards a bipartisan bill that will benefit all Americans and help to protect and strengthen our middle class. Thank you very much.
Good morning. First, let me thank all of you for being here this morning. I want to especially thank our firefighters for not only being here, but also for always rising to the occasion with so many challenges that we have here in San Francisco and throughout Northern California. And so to just know that thank you for your service and thank you for raising your voices today as it relates to the impact of this terrible tax scam to our firefighters, to our public servants, to our taxpayers, to the entire state as a whole. And Leader Pelosi has been relentless and vigilant and steadfast and determined to not only defeat this tax scam, but also to call their names and to make sure that everyone knows, the constituents who know of those Republicans who are voting and supporting this bill know that they're not representing their constituents and they're doing them harm. And so thank you, Leader Pelosi, for allowing us to continue to raise these names and lift them up and call their names so that people know throughout the state what their representatives and whose side that they are on. We're on the side of the American people, and we know exactly what the Republicans are trying to do, and that is scam the American people, as Leader Pelosi said. The Republican billionaire's first tax plan is a scam. It steals from struggling families and lines the pockets of millionaires, billionaires, and wealthy corporations. And independent economic experts have weighed in. Now, according to the analysis by the Nonpartisan Tax Policy Center, if Republicans are able to pass this bill, 38 million middle-income households will face tax hikes. That's 38 million. So the bill is, quite frankly, a disgrace also. It eliminates the student loan deductions, it eradicates medical expense deductions, and we'll talk about that in a minute, and at a time when American workers are struggling to make ends meet, this bill makes it easier for corporations to ship jobs overseas. And we can't forget that this tax package explodes our deficit by $1.7 trillion and is paid for by an egregious $1 trillion tax cut or cut to Medicare and Medicaid. That's in the Republican budget. So yeah, it's a slap in the American people's face. Americans deserve a tax code that ensures that everyone pay their fair share, not a rigged system, and that's what this tax plan is. It's rigged, that makes it harder for working families to get ahead. Americans deserve a tax code that leads to better jobs, better wages, and ultimately a better future for everyone. So we're here today to sound the alarm. The GOP tax scam cannot stand, and it must be defeated. We're going to continue to call their names. If Republicans succeed in passing this bill, millions of everyday Americans will be impacted. Teachers, for example, will lose a much-needed deduction for the supplies they buy for their students. 3 million immigrant children will no longer qualify for child tax credits. And to make matters worse, if you or someone in your family gets sick, you'll no longer be able to deduct those medical expenses. Now let me be clear, medical deductions have been a bridge over troubled water for millions of Americans handling steep medical costs in a country without comprehensive health coverage. There are people who are already shouldering catastrophic medical expenses with only the deductions standing between them and poverty. Ending these deductions would be a huge blow to low and middle income families, especially those struggling to make ends meet, the chronically ill, the disabled, seniors, and children. To put this in perspective, I'm going to introduce a friend who I have known for many, many years, but I just wanted to say, just in terms of this tax deduction, the $1,000 the repeal of the $10,000 deduction in the House bill, the Senate now has I believe, seen that this is not right, that it will hurt families and seniors and children, and that they're going to make it worse. Yeah. And that is just unbelievable. I mean, I thought that the Senate would at least have a little bit more compassion than what is taking place in their bill. So Evangeline Banji Buell, she's a Berkeley resident, and she's a tireless champion for the Filipino-American community in the East Bay. She's been married to her husband, Bill, for more than 40 years, and sadly, he now suffers from severe dementia. Now, they currently pay $197,000 a year for his care, and they rely heavily on the medical expense deduction, which has been a lifeline for their family. And as we honor our veterans this weekend, I just want to say, in introducing and bringing Mrs. Buell up, she's a historical gem herself. She's really the granddaughter of a Buffalo soldier. And her grandfather was Ernest Stokes. He was one of 6,000 Buffalo soldiers sent to the Philippines to fight during the Spanish-American War. So thank you again, Mrs. Buell, for being here. She's been a friend, a constituent for many, many years. It's an honor to see you, and thank you for telling your story about what this Republican tax scam, the impact it will have on you.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you very much, Barbara. Good morning. I'm Banji Buell. I'm 85, and my husband Bill is 88. And we have lived for the past 4.5 years at Piedmont Gardens in Oakland, which is a retirement community that also provides health care for seniors. 2 years ago, my husband developed both Alzheimer's and dementia. And as a result, the cost for our care almost tripled to almost $17,000 a month, or over $200,000 a year. We can't pay that much out of our retirement income alone, which is about half that amount. So we have been dipping each month into our savings, which isn't a very large sum. Fortunately, under the current tax law, we have been able to claim most of our medical expenses as deductions on our income tax. That doesn't cover the whole cost of our health care. It just slows down the drain on our savings. Without the deduction, we would soon become penniless, surviving on Medicaid and charity. We would also be required to pay more federal tax, even though we don't have the money to do it. Bill and I are not alone, and I know that about 8.5 million Americans claimed the medical expenses deduction on their tax last year. Millions of them are like Bill and me, getting older and sicker, but millions are also middle-aged and even younger, in poor health and with enormous medical expenses. Being able to claim this deduction doesn't mean that people are made whole again. It just means that they can't survive longer. I don't claim to understand the reasons why House Republicans want to change their tax law. I do know, however, that the House Republicans' tax bill not only robs us of our money, it destroys our dignity as human beings. This is an act of cruelty beyond my powers to understand. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Buell. Thank you again. Let us applaud Jim's beautiful, inspirational, and courageous, not only statement, but care that she has for her husband. It is Veterans Day, as my colleague, Congresswoman Lee, mentioned, and acknowledging Vanjie's family's contribution to the security of our country. It's important to note that we have vets out there against this bill because over 1 million veterans rely on Medicaid, and cuts in Medicaid affect veterans. There's also provisions in the bill that affect deductibility of contributions to nonprofits, and that will affect our veterans as well, and including the SALT. What happens with SALT will affect the veterans. Things like Meals on Wheels, food stamps, all the rest affect our veterans, and we claim, as we all have in our hearts, a great deal of respect for them. We owe them everything, and we're taking it away in this bill. Another area where our vets benefit is the issues that relate to education, including lifelong education, and I'm pleased to represent Shaya Kara, who's a student at USF, as I mentioned earlier. She'll talk about her situation, and then we'll have more to say on education after that. Shaya, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Shaya Kara. My parents came to America in 1981 with the hopes of providing a better future for their children. I was raised to value education and to have gratitude that I was in a country where I could learn and thrive without fear. I recently earned my BA in psychology from the University of San Francisco, where I served as student body president. While focusing on key equity issues, I recognized the importance of advocating for my constituencies. I felt that my capacity to serve was heightened when I was listening to our students, bridging gaps between the institution, and pushing for policy reform through research in psychology. I decided that I wanted to pursue a career that merged my psychology background with my policy work. I was accepted into graduate programs in the Choral Fellowship in Public Affairs. Ultimately, I chose to do the fellowship so I could get hands-on experience working and learning in the public sector while exploring the financial viability of pursuing a graduate degree, especially with my existing student loans. This new tax plan would take away the tax deductions on my student loan interest, and it could also take away the public service loan forgiveness plan. Beyond that, the possibility of pursuing a PhD seems less and less financially viable. This plan would mean that PhD candidates would have to pay taxes on the tuition and fees covered by their universities, and they would also have to pay on their modest stipends. My hope in obtaining a graduate education would be to learn how to give back to my community. This plan would seriously disincentivize me and many of my colleagues from pursuing graduate degrees and using our disciplines to contribute to the common good. It is becoming harder and harder for young people to acquire wealth with the rising rates of tuition and average debt by college graduates. And it's also harder for younger generations to access higher education. If this plan is adopted, it is clear that both access to wealth and education, but also health, is not a priority for future generations, and that's simply not the America that I know. Now I'd like to invite back Leader Pelosi to the podium. Thank you.
Thank you, Shia. Thank you, Shia. As you see, this is not only an assault on the middle class, it's an assault on the future, because that debt that this will take us into, a minimum of $1.5 trillion additional debt to the national debt, in not counting interest on all of that, it could go to $2-3 trillion. And here's the thing, we just talked about education and health and public service. On education, think of this. Kids who have, and families, because it's families helping to pay the debt. Right now there's a $2,500 deduction for your interest on your student loans, right now. But when this bill, if this bill were to pass, that would be gone. Is that an act of cruelty to America's families? And why? To give a tax break to the high end as we grow the national debt, taking it away from our kids and their families. If you were a teacher in school, as Congresswoman Lee mentioned earlier, say you're a teacher in a district and you bring supplies to school, as many teachers do, including my son-in-law who's a teacher, you can deduct the expenses of bringing those supplies to school, arts, crafts, whatever it happens to be. Not under this bill. You can get a $1.5 trillion tax deduction if you're a corporate America, but teachers helping in their classrooms lose their deduction. Why? To give a tax break to the wealthiest people in our country. 80% of this deduction goes to the top 2%. 80% of this tax scam goes to the top 2%. The list goes on in terms of education, but just think of this of children. Right now there's a tax deduction if you adopt. And if you adopt a child with special needs, further deduction. Not anymore. Not anymore. What? And if you're a business that helps employees adopt, and many businesses do, and you have a deduction for it now, not anymore. Why? Because they're too busy giving a tax deduction to the wealthiest people in our country and to corporate America, and increasing the deficit at the same time. But they want to show, well, we're making some cuts here and there. Really? Really? It's really a stunning thing. The list goes on, and it's just so much. But suffice to say that the SALT deduction, eliminating the SALT deduction, as Congresswoman said, when Mr. Buford spoke, he spoke about the fact that they have now allowed a $10,000 window there. The Senate says that's not going to happen. We're eliminating the entire deduction. So it's back to where the figures were that I read this morning. They said they're not accepting anything unless the full deduction is eliminated. That, again, a further act of cruelty. But our members, our Republican members, have already voted for that, and now we'll see where they go from here. I just wanted to put this in the words of others before we have some questions. This is a letter that was just put out November 9th, when we've seen the bill, by the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops. As written, this proposal appears to be the first federal income tax modification in American history that will raise income taxes on the working poor while simultaneously providing a large tax cut to the wealthy. No, I'm not reading you the whole letter. No tax reform proposal is acceptable that increases taxes for those living in poverty to help pay for benefits to wealthy citizens. And there are other things that relate to education. The work opportunity tax credit, they object to the fact that that's gone. The tax deduction on burdens of tuition and student loans. But the list goes on, but disability, people with disabilities are effective. And the deduction of state and local income and sales taxes may impact people. It gives an advantage to people in higher tax states. I mean, at disadvantage. Right now, the deduction, they'll say we shouldn't be giving California the opportunity to tax their people. So this is an anti-governance thing as well. And, oh, did I tell you this one more thing? Vis-a-vis corporate America. If you're an individual and you change jobs and you move, you cannot deduct your moving expenses. But if you're a corporation and you change your location, you can. So, I mean, and I didn't bring it here, but the president's, I don't know what the title is, but his name is Gary Cohen. He said nobody is happier about this bill than the corporate CEOs. One of our colleagues, Chris Collins, said that his donors have said, if you don't pass this bill, don't call me back. And what's his name? Lindsey Graham, he said the financial contributions will dry up for them. This isn't about their constituents. It's about their donors. It's also about their philosophy, which is trickle down. Tax cuts at the high end. If it trickles down to you, that would be good. If it doesn't, so be it. That's the free market. The free market, while they subsidize big businesses to send jobs overseas. So in other words, we have to defeat this bill. The only way to do it is for constituents to know what's in it so that they can hold their elected officials accountable. The Republicans shame on the Republicans in California for selling their constituents down the river so that corporations can take jobs overseas. With that, Barbara Lee would be pleased to answer any hard questions that you may have. Barbara, did you want to say
I just wanted to re-emphasize what the leader said in terms of painting the picture of who's going to get hurt by this tax plan, this tax scam. Senior citizens, the disabled, our children, our teachers, our firefighters. When you look at people who are just struggling to try to figure out how to have child care, when you look at those who are unemployed and who have lost jobs as a result of jobs being shipped offshore, this corporate tax deduction and tax credit and tax incentive now to take jobs offshore leaves more people unemployed in our own country. And it really is, when you look at it, the Republicans are trying to say that this is going to help the middle class. Well, I don't know, and I don't see who in the middle class is it going to help. I know it's not going to help their constituents. You look at veterans, as the leader indicated. I mean, you look at everyone in our country. Look at 90% of the population, 95% of our population. Nothing. It's going to hurt everyone in this country. And so hopefully by calling their names, these Republicans in California will understand that they're hurting their constituents, and they're really prohibiting them and keeping them from moving forward to try to take care of their families and live the American dream. And this is a major step backwards, and I know with your help and everyone's help here and the leaders' leadership, we will move forward to defeat this.
I want to have you read the entire letter of the U.S. Conference of Bishops. Going to go on to other things because they say, you know, while they give, they double the deduction. They take away. They give with one hand and take away with the other. That's my characterization of it. While they double one deduction, they eliminate the personal exemption and then go into all of these others. We have said to the Republicans, we believe we should have real tax reform. That is not what this is. This isn't tax reform. It's not even tax cuts, unless you're very wealthy or in corporate America. It's a tax on the middle class in our country, and it is something we have said, let's sit down, let's do this in a bipartisan way so it will have sustainability to create growth, to generate good-paying jobs, and reduce the deficit. This bill does just the opposite. Any questions? Yes, ma'am.
Yes, hi. Well, I had a question about the deduction of the property losses that you mentioned.
Yes.
The victims of the fire here in California, in Northern California, and versus the hurricane victims. Can you tell us what's behind that in your words? And please don't mince words.
Okay, but I will associate myself with Mrs. Buell's remarks when she said, I can't possibly explain why they would do such a thing. And let me at this time give a praise to our colleague Mike Thompson, working with Jared Huffman, but Mike bore the biggest brunt of this. Mike is on the Ways and Means Committee. Coming home, I watched the whole Ways and Means Committee hearing on TV, and he presented letters to the chairman of the committee. But all along, when this was developing, he was saying, "How could you?" And they voted on this. These Republicans already voted in the budget to do this. So you'd have to ask them, unless it's just some mean-spirited thing about California. But the fact is, Chairman Brady is from Texas, and Texas was affected, and we don't want them to be deprived of the opportunity that the budget describes. But if it was hurricane, and all of this in full light of the fires that were going on, so it wasn't as if it happened after the fact. You'd have to ask them. I don't think they have an answer. But Mr. Thompson submitted letters from the Hospital Association and what this will do, all of the consequences of it more particularly. It's just mean-spirited. But remember this, 14 Republicans from California voted knowing that was in the bill, and 13 of them would not sign a letter asking the president, asking that the budget give us the assistance. Not even talking about the tax deduction now, the assistance, the emergency assistance that we need for California. So it's a double whammy. Yes, sir.
Congresswoman, what's the timetable on this? And how many, are your Democrats united on this?
Yes.
And how many Republican votes would you have to flip?
Well, let me just say the timetable is urgent. It's urgent because they passed the bill out of committee yesterday. Their members had not even seen it. You know, they kind of revised the bill, what they call a manager's amendment, which is almost like a substitute, substantial change to the bill. They did that yesterday afternoon. We say it's with the speed of light in the dark of night, so nobody can see it. And that is what, thank you for asking on timing, because the more time we have, the less popular their bill will be, and they just want to sneak it through. And so they will take it to Rules Committee, which will probably change the bill again, so we'll be voting on another sight unseen with adequate time for the American people to understand the assault they're making on our economy, and more importantly, to individuals' financial stability. We'll probably vote on it next week. That's what they say. And then the Senate, at the same time, the Senate is putting out their bill, and in their bill, they make the SALT return it to its original form. The original form, state and local taxes, you can't deduct. And the New Yorkers tried to make it a little better, so they said for their first $10,000 you can deduct that. Doesn't mean that much in California. But now the Senate is saying, no, nothing. Now, in addition, I think it's important to note that in New Jersey and New York, which are very effective, other states too, but New Jersey and New York largely affected, a large number of the Republicans there voted against the bill. So what's the matter with our members? What's the matter with our members? We have to make sure that, now they're being sold a bill of goods. They'll say, oh, it's not that, it's not that. These are not our statistics. These are statistics from the IRS about how much those people will pay.
Let me just comment on the unity of our Democratic caucus, because under Leader Pelosi's tremendous leadership, and I'm a member of many, many caucuses, I don't know of one individual who would support this tax scam. Secondly, when you look at just specifically the SALT scam and what they're doing with state and local taxes, I'm a member of the Tri-Caucus, the Black, Hispanic, and Asian Pacific American caucuses. And when you look at the impact on jobs and services in our communities and what this will do, it's really very dangerous. It's scary. More people are going to lose jobs. And we're trying to make sure that any tax package that comes forward creates jobs. This bill is going to take jobs away offshore, as well as people who are working here in public service, providing those services, will lose jobs. And it's really very dangerous. It's sad, it's a sham, and I can't think of one member that I have heard say they even care about this bill in terms of trying to even fix it.
What I just say about our caucus, it's not about this bill. This bill is the most recent manifestation of the difference of a governing for the public good or governing for the rich and powerful at the exploiting the middle class. Our caucus is unified around the financial stability of the middle class, the economic security of working families in our country. And every day, every week, either in committee or on the floor, we have to fight their assaults on the middle class. while they go out and tell a different story. That's why I say what they're doing is an insult to the intelligence of the American people as they assault the financial stability of America's families. And yes, sir?
Yeah, two-parter for you. One, I don't think you guys mentioned affordable housing and just the impact that loss of private activity. In wages and workers, I mean, certainly that's the counter argument to all this. Can you maybe address that sort of philosophy?
Yeah, actually, the bishops do mention as I say, there's so many things. When it comes to housing, the bill repeals the mortgage tax credit certificates, which are only available for first-time home buyers under certain income thresholds. This is a very important initiative, but of course, they repeal that. Home builders are opposed to the bill. There's so many people opposed to the bill. In fact, they put out there that it's about small business, but the small, what's that thing, FNIB, Federation of National Independent Businesses, wholly owned subsidiary of the Republican Party, opposes this bill. Now, they may get a little tweak or something to say, oh, now it's better. But it's structurally, even if you corrected one or the other of these things, it is structurally horrible. Okay, and then second, while they're saying that if we our corporate tax rate is too high, if we lower it, they're going to give raises to their constituents. I mean, to their employees. I mean, it has never happened. This is the philosophy: tax cuts at the high end or at the corporate rate, and it will generate jobs and higher income. It never has. It's a hoax. In this case, and I was having this discussion with some, not Democrats, not Republicans, just business people the other day. They said, while they're talking about taking the rate down to 20%, the effective rate that most businesses pay is about 17%, if they pay any taxes at all. Some are in the single digit as to what they pay. But let's subject it to scrutiny and say, okay, if you think that that's going to happen, we had an amendment that we had press conference on and the rest. If you say that that's going to happen, if you give these tax cuts to corporate America and it's going to increase the wages of working families, if it doesn't, there's a snapback. You can't get the tax breaks, and you have to return the money if you have that much confidence that this is what you're going to do. But of course they don't, and that's why they would not accept our amendment. But that's the fight we have. It's like, this is a moment of truth. Tell the truth to the American people, that you don't believe in governance, and that's why you want to deal with assault, so that governance, and you know what's going to happen? They're going to say, oh, we've got a tax break, which is fake, and localities and states are going to have to raise taxes to meet the needs of the American people. And one more thing on that the bishops say, because I'm referencing them because I want you to take somebody else's word for it. They talk about how it eliminates incentive for charitable giving and development. Doubling the standard deduction will turn tax relief to some people. However, for those who give to charity, it will make the charitable deduction increasingly a benefit only available to high-income families. And then when they do that, organizations that minister to the needs of people in the community will be at a disadvantage. So it's a mess.
I'd just like to speak to the affordable housing piece of this. Once again, and I think we need to look at this in terms of why we're saying it is a tax giveaway to millionaires, billionaires, and corporations. They're pulling the rug out of middle-income families, working families, in terms of just their ability to acquire equity in one's home. The majority of middle-income individuals, they don't play on the stock market on Wall Street. The only path to perhaps sending their kids to college or starting a small business is through the equity in their home. So once again, they're pulling the rug out of middle-class, middle-income individuals, working families, to not allow them even to have the opportunity to buy a home and to send their kids to college and start a small business. Once again, millionaires, billionaires, corporations they're benefiting, and who are they benefiting? On the backs of the most vulnerable, low-income, middle-income individuals. And and on top of that, offshoring incentives to take companies abroad and create jobs in foreign countries rather than creating jobs here at home. It's really a sham also. And hopefully the Republicans in California will begin to understand this is going to impact their constituents also.
I don't know that we think that New Yorkers and New Jersey people are smarter and faster to see the light, but apparently the Republicans in those states understand what this does to their constituents. Our people are walking lockstep to a very ultra anti-governance agenda. But home ownership is about building community too, and that's really what's so sad about all of this. Well, I think we've covered a lot of territory, but as I say, the atrocities in this bill are endless. We could be here all day. We were trying to prioritize some of the concerns that we have, and I wanted to again thank Chief Williams and also thank Chief Hayes White. I saw her last night, and she's at a funeral right now, but sends her support for what we're talking about here. And this is, again, a moment of truth, and we are demanding that people, the Republicans, be truthful about what they are doing to the American people, and instead of what they're doing, to sit down with us to do a true tax reform that creates growth, generates good-paying jobs, and reduces the deficit. Democrats have a better deal, as Barbara said, better jobs, better pay, better future. This is not about a better future. Thank you all very much. Thank you. And let us thank the San Francisco firefighters once again.
We'll come to you all for the qualified action for your question and your question. We're just going to bring
One, two, three, four, five. 1, 2.